Hey guys, 60 Minutes has interviewed many high-profile guests, including political figures like British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Unlike these elites, the guest on July 5, 1981, was just a street prostitute in Sydney. Her identity and the content of the interview shocked everyone deeply. Her name was Sallie-Anne Huckstepp. On the show, she was a young woman around 25 years old, wearing a plain plaid shirt and jeans. She seemed to be struggling to hold back her emotions. What she set out to do was expose the crimes of Roger Rogerson, including taking bribes, drug trafficking, and murdering innocent people. Roger Rogerson was a famous star detective in New South Wales. Even though Sallie-Anne knew the consequences of her actions, she was brave enough to do it. Due to the huge status gap between Sallie-Anne and Roger Rogerson and the shocking nature of her claims, some controversial content was not made public at the time. It was only after her death that the public learned the full truth. Let's dive into Sallie-Anne Huckstepp's life and see how she fell into the abyss, then saved herself to become a hero. A miserable childhood. Sallie-Anne was born in 1954 with the maiden name Sallie-Anne Krivoshow. Her grandparents, Noam and Judith, were Jewish immigrants from the Soviet Union. In 1926, they left their hometown in Azerbaijan and traveled all the way to Sydney, settling in the North Bondi neighborhood in the city's eastern suburbs. They worked hard and had 3 children, Isaac, Rose, and Jack. Jack was Sallie-Anne's father. He met 16-year-old Pat at a Christmas dance and later had Sallie-Anne on December 12, 1954. 20 months later, their second daughter, Deborah, was born. But when Sallie-Anne was 5 years old, Pat abandoned her 2 daughters and never returned. So Sallie-Anne grew up without a mother's love. The 2 sisters were mostly raised by their grandmother Judith, as their grandfather Noam had already passed away. Jack worked long hours to support the family and rarely spent time with his daughters, but he spoiled them materially. According to neighbors, Judith was a strict and irritable woman. Sallie-Anne was a troublemaker who often made her grandmother fly into a rage. Every time this happened, Judith would beat the 6-year-old Sallie-Anne hard on the thighs with a large wooden cooking spoon. Later, through a TV industry friend of Jack's, the 2 girls appeared on the popular Johnny O'Keefe show at the time. Sallie-Anne was also chosen as a child model for a chain department store. When asked about her dreams, Sallie-Anne would reply cheerfully, "An actress or a singer." Jack had great confidence in his eldest daughter's future. He told Sallie-Anne, "You're very beautiful. If you develop well, all the boys will be crazy about you." Yes, if everything had gone according to plan, Sallie-Anne should have had a wonderful life. In reality, the young Sallie-Anne was rebellious, precocious, tough, and full of self-awareness. To her Aunt Rose, she was an adventurous child, something that clashed with her innocent appearance. Jack struggled to handle his increasingly rebellious eldest daughter. When Sallie-Anne was 10 years old, Jack bought a house in Dover Heights to better discipline the girls. He married a widow named Estelle, and that became the new home for the 2 sisters. Estelle had a child of her own, so Sallie-Anne became her target. Estelle would lock Sallie-Anne's bedroom door from the outside after she fell asleep, only opening it after 7 a.m. the next day. If Sallie-Anne needed to use the toilet at night, she had to climb out the window. If she wet herself, Estelle would force her to wear the wet underwear around her neck and display herself to the neighbors all day. Once, Sallie-Anne stole a few cherries. Her stepmother then poured detergent over a whole cold pork chop as sauce and made her eat it all. There were many similar incidents, and most of the time, Jack chose to turn a blind eye. This miserable experience lasted for more than 2 years. Eventually, Jack and Estelle divorced, but Sallie-Anne grew up overnight. After Estelle left, she became the mistress of the house, cooking, doing laundry, ironing, and protecting her sister. She learned to put on makeup for movies and TV shows and wore mature clothes. Neighbors secretly called her Lolita, a term for a precocious, seductive young girl. At that time, Sallie-Anne was a beautiful teenager with dazzling blonde hair, deep blue eyes, and a sweet smile mixed with premature sadness. Many boys were crazy about her, but she felt nothing. She only liked bad boys. In the mid to late 1960s, Australia experienced a marijuana boom. Sallie-Anne smoked marijuana for the first time when she was 14. Whenever she felt sad or tired, Sallie-Anne would go to Bondi Beach. Many of her peers gathered there, and almost every gathering ended with a group of people smoking a joint together. In August 1969, Sallie-Anne met a boy named Danny Freilich at a dance. Danny came from a wealthy family and was approved by Jack. 2 weeks after dating Danny, the two had sex at Sallie-Anne's home and were caught by Jack. He detained Danny at his house, shouting that he would call the police despite his daughter's desperate pleas. Sallie-Anne was only 14 years old, and Danny was already 18. He clearly knew Sallie-Anne's age. So regardless of whether Sallie-Anne was forced or voluntary, Danny should have been charged with statutory rape. However, shortly after Jack called the police, he privately called Danny's father. He said he would consider dropping the charges if the other party paid 10,000 Australian dollars, equivalent to about 120,000 Australian dollars today. But Danny's father refused to pay this settlement fee. In court, Sallie-Anne's most private details were repeatedly questioned. Danny's lawyer also suggested that Sallie-Anne had sex with him to get marijuana. Danny's father even brought in Jack's ex-wife Estelle. The former stepmother not only exposed all kinds of private information about Sallie-Anne, but also described her as acting like a prostitute. The evidence was that Sallie-Anne wore a sheer, sexy nightgown. In such cases, women always bear more blame. Sallie-Anne was branded a slut from then on. In the end, the court sentenced Danny to a $50 Australian fine and acquitted him, stating, "A girl who associates with prostitutes does not need legal protection." This verdict was unacceptable. It ruined a young girl's life, just like that. Years later, addicted to drugs, Sallie-Anne wandered the streets of Sydney as a prostitute doing drugs. But people had already started calling her that when she was 14. The above is the story of Sallie-Anne's miserable childhood. Let's move on to what happened next. Falling into the abyss. After the verdict, the high-achieving Sallie-Anne dropped out of school. She got a job as a waitress at 2 nightclubs in Sydney. Perhaps she just wanted to escape the neighborhood where everyone judged her. The glitzy nightclubs were also frequent haunts of criminals. Among these people was a man named Brian Huckstepp. He was 8 years older than Sallie-Anne and a small-time criminal with a prior record. Soon after, Sallie-Anne married Brian and moved with him to Kalgoorlie, a mining city in Western Australia. She was 17 years old at the time. Brian was an abusive drug addict. He quickly convinced his young wife to work as a prostitute to support his drug habit. They later moved back to Sydney. In 1973, 18-year-old Sallie-Anne gave birth to her daughter Sasha. Shortly after Sasha was born, the couple divorced. By then, due to her drug addiction, Sallie-Anne had become one of the many prostitutes in King's Cross, Sydney's famous red light district. Drug-addicted sex workers were naturally the focus of the police. In fact, even before that, she often bribed the police on behalf of her ex-husband Brian to get him out of jail. Corruption in the police force was common in Sydney at that time. Money and intimidation could buy silence from the law. These secrets were unimaginable to law-abiding citizens and something they usually never encountered. But for girls like Sallie-Anne in the underground world, these were rules they had to accept early on. In 1975, 20-year-old Sallie-Anne was ordered by the court to undergo mandatory drug rehabilitation at Chelmsford, a private hospital in New South Wales. The hospital practiced what was called deep sleep therapy. Medical staff would inject patients with large doses of barbiturates, a central nervous system depressants that are addictive with long-term use, putting them into a deep coma for days or even a week. During this time, unsuspecting patients were given high-voltage electric shock treatments. Sallie-Anne received 14 electric shock treatments over a 15-day course. Her sister Deborah recalled that after the treatment, Sallie-Anne weighed less than 40 kilograms. She couldn't speak or walk. She could only crawl on the ground. This life-threatening psychiatric treatment did not help her get rid of drugs. On the contrary, because she was forced to take large amounts of barbiturates during the treatment, Sallie-Anne became addicted to these drugs. Deborah said that after this, Sallie-Anne fell even further into degradation. In the years that followed, Sallie-Anne continued to work under the neon lights of King's Cross. She exchanged her body for drugs while raising her daughter Sasha. Despite her unhealthy lifestyle, Sallie-Anne truly did her best to raise her daughter. For Sallie-Anne, after all these years, she thought she understood the rules of the underground world. But as it turned out, she was still too naive. A brief glimmer of hope. In January 1981, Shortly after her 26th birthday, Sallie-Anne met drug dealer Warren Lanfranchi while buying drugs. Warren Lanfranchi was the son of a gunsmith from a family with a long criminal tradition. At 17, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for stealing a TV. When he met Sallie-Anne, he had just been released from prison for a month. While serving his sentence at Long Bay Jail, Warren met a big shot, Nettie Smith, known as the king of Sydney's criminal underworld. He was tall and imposing, nearly 2 meters tall, and his main skills were drug trafficking and armed robbery. His violent temper made people tremble with fear. Warren's brother said his younger brother admired Nettie Smith immensely. After being released from prison, Warren, who had been a small-time thief, was promoted to a drug distributor and enforcer under Nettie Smith. Warren did not use drugs himself and had a poor tolerance for alcohol. His hobby was fitness, and he was a talented boxer. While in Long Bay Jail, he even won the middleweight championship in the prison boxing competition. Warren preferred to use a baseball bat or his fists as weapons. Although he came from a family of gunsmiths and was skilled with guns, he did not like to use them. Warren began to pursue Sallie-Anne aggressively, and Sallie-Anne was equally infatuated with him. Even though Warren Lanfranchi was a criminal with little morality, his attitude towards Sallie-Anne was romantic and sincere. For example, after meeting Sallie-Anne, even though he knew about her job, he sent her a large bouquet of red roses every day. He bought 2 bottles of methadone, a drug used for alternative drug rehabilitation, from another drug dealer for $800. He personally gave Sallie-Anne an injection every morning and evening. He stayed by her side almost all the time, taking her to the gym to exercise to relieve withdrawal symptoms. For the first time in nearly a decade of struggling with drug addiction, Sallie-Anne successfully quit drugs. She even thought the process was easy because Warren made her feel fulfilled for the first time in her life. So she no longer needed drugs to numb herself or fill the emptiness. 3 months after moving in with Warren, Sallie-Anne became pregnant. Drug use can cause irregular ovulation, and many female drug addicts go months or even a year without a period. This was the first time Sallie-Anne had been pregnant in 8 years. Successfully quitting drugs and exercising regularly made her body radiate its youthful vitality. A greater crisis. The news of Sallie-Anne's pregnancy made Warren very happy. He planned to make a big, quick buck and then retire from crime. He wanted to take Sallie-Anne and move abroad. His way of making this quick buck was to steal drugs from other drug dealers. Because Warren's boss was Nettie Smith, he thought other drug dealers would not easily make a big deal out of it if their drugs were stolen occasionally. But this time, they made a serious and fatal mistake. One late night in June 1981, Warren stole some heroin from 2 seemingly insignificant drug dealers. The heroin was of high quality and was quickly sold out. Warren made a total of 37,000 Australian dollars, equivalent to about 170,000 Australian dollars today. Then Roger Rogerson put a price on his head. But what Warren didn't know was that the owner of these drugs was not any gang in Sydney's underground drug network. It was someone more terrifying than any gang, Roger Rogerson, a hero of the New South Wales police force and known as the Super Cop. In the eyes of those drug dealers, Roger Rogerson was a drug lord with a police badge. He not only had the ruthlessness of the underground world, but also a more deadly weapon, the immunity granted to him by his police powers. Just hearing his name would make even the most vicious criminals tremble with fear. When Warren learned that the drugs he had stolen belonged to Roger Rogerson, he was terrified. He immediately took Sallie-Anne and left their shared apartment, hiding in different hotels. When the host asked Sallie-Anne on 60 Minutes why she didn't return the money, a sad smile crossed her lips. Because we were scared. Sergeant Rogerson is an evil man. He's a killer. Many people have disappeared. We were afraid we would be killed too. In the eyes of the arrogant hero cop, this was equivalent to pulling the tiger's whiskers. He began to hunt down Warren Lanfranchi and his girlfriend Sallie-Anne. Warren bought a gun and held it tightly by his side even when he slept, fearing that Roger Rogerson would find and kill them. He begged his boss, Nettie Smith, to intercede with Roger Rogerson and ask him to spare himself and his girlfriend. After negotiations with Nettie Smith, Roger Rogerson proposed 2 conditions to Warren. If he met them, he would consider letting him off the hook. 1. Warren would compensate him for 30,000 Australian dollars in losses, with a 10,000 Australian dollar down payment due first. 2. Roger Rogerson would arrange a robbery for Warren with inside information provided by the police. Warren would have to give Rogerson a portion of the stolen money as compensation. Warren's boss, Nettie Smith, told him that he would personally accompany Warren to meet Roger Rogerson on June 27th. Warren would hand over the 10,000 Australian dollar down payment, and Rogerson would tell him the details of the robbery with inside information. June 27th, 1981, was a Saturday. Sallie-Anne ironed a thick shirt for Warren. They tied the 10,000 Australian dollar down payment into bundles and stuffed it into Warren's waist. He then put on a jacket to cover the money. Warren did not take his gun. He left it with Sallie-Anne. Sallie-Anne walked him to the door. A sense of foreboding hung over her. She tried to say something lighthearted. "When you come back, can you buy me a bunch of red roses?" Warren turned around and smiled at her. "You never know, baby. Maybe this time you'll be the one buying me flowers, maybe funeral flowers." They kissed goodbye at the door. They agreed that if Warren didn't come back by 6 p.m., he was probably dead, and Sallie-Anne should find a place to hide. At around 2:50 p.m., Warren and Nettie Smith arrived at the meeting place, a location called Dangar Place. Rogerson was already waiting there, and the area seemed empty. As Warren walked towards him, Rogerson suddenly pulled out a gun and shot Warren in the heart. As soon as the first shot rang out, Nettie Smith, who had been prepared, fled the scene quickly. At the same time, Rogerson's men, about 18 people, swarmed in from all directions, surrounding the sergeant and the dying Warren on the ground. Rogerson's men quickly took the 10,000 Australian dollars from Warren's body and threw a handgun next to him. After that, Rogerson walked up to Warren and fired a second shot at his forehead. This type of shooting is called an execution, usually used by gangs to kill traitors. Just like that, on a street in Sydney's inner city, under the afternoon sun, 22-year-old Warren was murdered by the star cop while surrounded by a group of police officers. Of course, the above is only the version speculated by the media later. Rogerson's own story was, his informant, Nettie Smith, had arranged a meeting. He and his men had only planned to use this as a trap to arrest Warren. But the latter not only resisted arrest, but also pulled out a gun. He had to fire 2 shots to kill him in self-defense. However, they made a fatal mistake with the handgun planted on Warren. It was an 80-year-old, almost obsolete gun with only 1 bullet inside. How could Warren Lanfranchi, who came from a family of gunsmiths, carry a weapon with almost no deterrent power to commit a robbery? Ballistics experts from the forensic department also questioned Rogerson's shooting trajectory, but these doubts were easily dismissed by his superiors. Rogerson had a great reputation, and all his subordinates told the same story. So what was there to doubt? The case quickly became a hot news story, described as perfect police work. The hero cop once again enjoyed media praise and the title of the bravest and most honest police officer. In November 1981, a coronial inquest into Warren Lanfranchi's murder was held. The coronial jury accepted that Rogerson had been acting in the course of his duty, attempting to arrest Lanfranchi, but they rejected his claim of self-defense. This was mainly because Rogerson initially said the time between the 2 shots was almost simultaneous. But the witnesses later said there was an interval of about 12 seconds between the 2 shots. The witnesses' testimony undermined Rogerson's story and his public and professional image. The final outcome. Hours after Warren's murder, Sallie-Anne fled alone to a new hotel. There, she suffered a miscarriage. Then Sallie-Anne went on the 60 Minutes show and bravely exposed everything. After this 60 Minutes interview, Sallie-Anne's life took a new direction. She became a writer. But as time passed and the hype faded, she gradually disappeared from public view and became a target for killers. Her decision to expose Rogerson and his criminal network had almost sealed her fate, and she knew this day would eventually come. On the night of February 6, 1986, 5 years after the 60 Minutes interview, Sallie-Anne received a phone call late at night. She hurried out of her house and towards her end. On February 7th, her body was found face down in Busby's Pond in Sydney's Centennial Park. The cause of death was strangulation and drowning. 2 months after Sallie-Anne's murder, Roger Rogerson was dismissed from the police force for misconduct. but he denied any involvement in Sallie-Anne's death. Sallie-Anne's murder became an unsolved case. The investigation into her death lasted from 1987 to 1991. The main suspect was Nettie Smith, who admitted to the murder in secretly recorded conversations and said he had acted on Rogerson's orders. In 1995, thanks to Sallie-Anne's revelations on 60 Minutes, the Wood Royal Commission investigated police corruption in New South Wales and named Rogerson as one of the key gang figures. But Rogerson used his tactics to get acquitted. It wasn't until 1999 that Rogerson was convicted of perverting the course of justice and lying to the Police Integrity Commission. Then in 2016, Rogerson was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of another young drug dealer, Jamie Gow. Thus, Sallie-Anne's claim in 1981 that Roger Rogerson was the most corrupt police officer in Australia was proven true. Time would show that it takes courage for a young woman to expose evil. Even though she knew she would face mortal danger after speaking out, she still bravely stood in front of the camera. She revealed all this not only for herself, but also for all those who had suffered. As Sallie-Anne said, everyone has the right to seek justice, even if that person is a drug dealer or a thief. Someone has to stand up and put an end to it all. This is something that deserves our respect. So, this is the story of Sallie-Anne Huckstepp. I hope you enjoy it and find strength from it. Thank you.